everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion. Second hour is something we'd like to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about WWDC. This is kind of our last day. We'll talk about how we did it tomorrow, but this is our last day of talking about it. And as a group, we'll just talk about things that we thought were interesting, things that we think might make a difference. And the general view of WWDC, it's more of a discussion internally among our panelists to talk about that. So we'll discuss that in the second hour and answer your questions and read your comments. So what did you think about the WWDC this year? What did you like? What did you not like? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? So put those comments into Mukana. And now we're going to go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from Roscoe Jones here on the panel from Brea, California, and he says, Linus Tech Tips took on YouTube's lack of HDR support. So did he get it right or did he mislead us? And they've got a link there.
Go ahead, John.
Super. I watched this before the show. I'm super interested to see your thoughts on this video, Alex.
I didn't see the video. I have to admit, I didn't watch it. Did he just talk about he can't do HDR?
Yeah. He said they have some methods in order to do HDR, but they don't normally work properly. He just posted it. It's brand new. I thought he did a great job. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it. I think that he's probably wrong. so it's I can tell you that if he's talking about live, we're actually doing live HDR. We've done it in the past. And we're going to do a lot more of it. And so HDR10 is supported as well as HLG. So what you have to do though is you have to use HLS, not RTMP. So he may not know how to do that. It's not trivial. You know, the getting the HDR to work, getting the HLS to work, at least for us. I mean, I think in some cases OBS and other things might be able to support it a little bit more effectively. But the issue has been, I know with our AWS account, we had to do some fiddling with the actual code to make that work. But in the app support, it should work just fine. Of course, if he's using something like OBS to stream, then he may have a whole other set of problems that are occurring there. As far as uploading the content to YouTube, that's the HDR10 has worked for quite some time. So I don't think that's really an issue. And I believe that it's YouTube that is now supporting HDR10 Plus, which is dealing with the metadata on a frame-by-frame basis. Go ahead, Courtney.
If you're streaming, this may be a stupid question, but this is why I'm asking it. If you're streaming HDR, the people that don't have HDR, do they get a different quality stream, or does it look just bad on their TV sets?
It may be what he's having trouble with is the tone mapping. So it doesn't really. I will say that HDR doesn't tone map super well. So if you have something that can manage it, so if you're on a Mac specifically, it looks great because most modern Macs, anything in the last 4 years, I think, will tone map for you. But anything older than that will tend to not tone map correctly, so it often looks a little odd.
Usually, it looks just older Roku or any other
all look dark. Yep. Yeah. So anything that can't see it will definitely. So he may be referring to that. I think the tone mapping can get better, but it's not that it doesn't support it. It's but it's not perfect in those areas. So if you're there expecting an HDR stream and you have a device that can see it, it looks amazing. But if you are on an older machine, the places that HDR and surround don't work as well as Android and Windows. This mostly has to do with licensing. So a lot of the licensing has put them behind in their support, not just for YouTube's doing it their own way, but the main thing is that Windows, Microsoft didn't want to license my understanding anyways, they didn't want to license HEVC, for all their machines, and Apple did. And as a result, Apple is just way ahead because it's not just YouTube, but it's just that they had time to think about it. They've been supporting HDR and paying for it for the last 5 years. And so they are infinitely ahead of everybody else when it comes to that support, as well as the surround, Atmos and so on and so forth. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just saw a note fly by that Jonas Tatel weighed in on this and said exactly what Alex said, which is that it's not about an inability. It's about how HDR gets mapped to SDR and YouTube doesn't read the metadata correctly. So that's another +1 on Alex's explanation. That's exactly
it's mostly just, it's not tone mapping yet. And again, that's one of the reasons that we want to do more of it is because we want to push that envelope and hopefully help YouTube find the solutions. There's just not many people using it either. I think that's part of the problem is that it's an outlier from an engineering perspective. It's not something that this isn't the biggest fish that they have to fry. Go ahead, Courtney.
What's a telltale look that would identify the fact that you're receiving an HDR signal but unable to correctly tone map it?
It should look very drab, like it'll look dark, desaturated. Because
I'll never be able to tell then.
Yeah, because basically what happens is that in HDR it's kind of like this to some degree, where there's a ton of information here and here, and that gets remapped out to play it back on your screen, and it will, it recaptures a lot of the data. But with this knee here, it will look very drab, because without the extension, without straightening it back out again or extending it, it's not going to look very good. So that's why that's the curve that is problematic. Go ahead, Bill.
I've also seen when working with HDR footage in Final Cut that if it doesn't work in the other direction, things become hyper colorful and super contrasty and just really ugly.
Yeah, I mean, this is generally just it's that the curve. So this is where the lookup tables make a big difference. The LUTs. It's because you're basically doing a transform. So if you have a 709 that goes into the system and then it gets converted to HDR, it took what was a full range, image and stretches it up. So it makes it all brighter. So that instead of going drab to looking great, it goes from a straight, looking pretty good to looking nuclear. so that's the other conversion.
That's an excellent description, Alex.
Yeah. So
what happened to my footage?
Yeah, exactly. So it should look white hot if you're taking a 709, but that's because it's going through this lookup table. The lookup table is basically, if you think about in Photoshop, you have input output. And this is straight input output. In Photoshop, if you pull it up like this, it gets a little brighter because you've now moved. You've said what was center is now higher, right? So that's how this works. That's how that curve works. Is this if it's the same in, same out, it's like this. It's linear. But if you pull this curve up, it says, okay, what was here is now up here when it goes back out again. And so what's happening is this is just for one channel, or all the channels at one time. What a lookup table does is it does all of this for every channel, and it builds essentially a cube that is all those channels. So basically it's, if you think about it, red, green, and blue, the cube is built that way. And so basically and that can be a 33, it's oftentimes a 33 or more point cube. That means how many points are in here. And essentially, as you move them in 3D space, you are doing this transform, but in all three different colors at the same time. And so that's what a lookup table or a cube, that's why it's called a cube file for the lookup table. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Guy Cochran in Seattle. He says, the Infocom session with Sam and Alex, how did it go yesterday?
Go ahead, John.
Okay, I caught most of it. I missed like the first 10 minutes. Sam, I love you, but your audio and video did not look good. The content was fantastic, but I expect higher production video and audio quality out of Sam.
I will say that one thing that we did touch on in the show is that doing audio and video hybrid is very hard. Like it's hard. As someone who's done a lot of it, what Sam was doing, and it took a lot of work for Sam to do what he did to make that work. And fundamentally, the problem you have is just audio in a room is never going to be as good as audio in a studio. Now, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's one thing to just explain to somebody the value of what we do here in office hours, but it's another thing to show and by example. Is that you said something I thought that was very interesting and resonated, and that was that you said, I look much better here at home in my studio with my setup than I would if I were there with you all in Infocom. So it was kind of a neat little value lesson for the folks who are there. And by the way, was Guy in the audience? I was looking for him back there when they had that little quick shot.
I bet you Guy was busy on the booth showing off his one-person studio. I think that is the case, and that's why I stopped going, is that I have more, I think I look better, sound better. I can do this. I can draw on my screen. I can do a lot of different things, cut to different images. All those things are possible when I come in virtually, and so I actually feel like it's a better solution for the audience than actually coming in person. Next question.
Cindy in Colorado says, I like using Zoom OSC, but it uses an old version of Zoom. Therefore, if I enable two-way chat to the waiting room in my Zoom account, I cannot join a meeting started by that account with Zoom OSC. Any idea when or if Zoom OSC will get updated?
Go ahead, John.
We feel your pain. According to Andy, there's a new version coming out in June this month. So we're excited to see it.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the dates are, but I think that sometime this summer we expect, Zoom OSC and ISO to be updated. I think it's a known fact. So so that's hopefully we'll see it soon. Next question.
Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis says, besides the Decimator MDHX and a Perfect Queue, what are your go-to items to include in your live production toolkit?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I always carry a bunch of these stick PCs and a bunch of these little mini mouse and keyboards. I don't know if you can get it in focus there. Well, anyway, you get the idea. To use for background monitors, if there's a monitor in the scene that you want to run a loop on or something, I always use them for that. Also, they can be used to bring additional streams in, bring additional people in. It's like bringing a whole bag of laptops with you,
Go ahead, Mitchell.
A Leatherman and a big roll of gaff tape.
Gaff tape. Yes, lots of gaff tape. I think those are the big things that I have there. Those are probably the things that are on there. Lots of converters. I have lots and lots and lots of little converters that convert this to that. Barrels, converters, those types of things are pretty common for me. And when I'm doing actual presentations or live production, one of the other things is a USB Pre 2. It is it's this Swiss Army knife of I need to get audio out of my computer in a balanced and useful way without any, it's expensive, but most productions I have one around just because, I need audio out of this computer. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to figure out drivers or anything else. I just plug it in, set it down, and I now have great balanced audio and balanced inputs if I need it. Bill?
The one thing I always have with me is I have a small Coast flashlight that has both red and white things. And I can't tell you the number of times I've been anywhere backstage, which is always dark and it's always trippable. And to click that red light on to get between point A and point B has saved me from a lot of mistakes.
Next question.
David Martin in Memphis, Tennessee says, I might need to use Zoom ISO on short notice and I won't be able to use a Stream Deck Plus companion. Is there a way to manually assign multi-pin outputs?
I'm sure that there is, but I don't know how to do that manually. I'm sure that that's possible. But I don't think I have an answer. And it doesn't seem like anybody else here does. I think you might have stumped us on that one. Sorry about that. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, is up next. Cloud production is such a general term encompassing both virtual machine work and web-based. Is there a better way to describe web-page-based production workflows?
Well, and I wouldn't say, I think I would be less likely to say web page-based production workflows and more of a cloud, because cloud production for me is not web-based. It's mostly some kind of cloud-based, but a lot of times we're not using the web at all. We're talking directly to machines and clouds are just somebody else's hardware. so it's, we can shorten that up. It's just in a nice server farm. And so I think that we're interacting with those virtual machines, but I think that I wouldn't talk about web-based production. I think that's the one thing I would avoid because web has a certain quality to it. But I would say scalable production, centerless production. Those are things that we talk about a lot. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Could you see AR, augmented reality, becoming part of the future Belfast method distributed live production workflow? For example, an AR model of a venue.
I think that's pretty far away. So I actually think that we're probably not going to see AR in that way or VR in that way anytime super soon. I mean, a lot of us are testing it, but I think that the hard part is that how do you make it look really realistic? And we already, when we're online, we already feel a little less real than we do when we're in. And so adding computer graphics to it makes it less real. And I think that that's not necessarily the direction that we want to go yet. I think that we want to keep watching it and keep doing research and waiting for it to catch up to where it needs to be. but there's still some time that's going to be required. Go ahead, Courtney.
Also, because augmented reality is really a one-person viewport type of protocol, so everyone's viewport would be different, and so it'd be hard to do something that would work across multiple people.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, in the USA, says, I've been using Restream Studio and bringing the primary feed in as RTMP with the text slide as the background image so that if the source dies, the stream doesn't. What other fallbacks would reproduce this?
Well, I think that, a lot of times what we do is, I don't use Restream Studio, so a lot of times I have inputs in the AWS cloud that can do the same thing, where I can drop over to that if I need to. That way it's, again, in the cloud. A lot of times our encoders themselves have slides. The three big slides that we create are starting soon. So if we're late, our countdown clock has run out, but we're not ready, starting soon. A we'll be right back slide. That we'll be right back slide doesn't have the show name or the client logo on it. A lot of people think that it should, but that becomes a meme. So we've learned not to do that. so you just have a we'll be right back and the best thing that you can do, we made some, there's the funny part is that you make really good we'll be right back slides and then you really want it to crash and it doesn't. We had a client that really wanted ours. We had we bought a motion capture, system and like $15,000 motion capture system. Wasn't really big, wasn't really small. And we were really excited. We wanted to use it. And so we made these little, for a while in the late aughts, there was the Gumbies. They had kind of a Gumby look, and that was something that a lot of business graphics had where these, we're not going to put a human form or a human color. They're going to be blue or they're going to be green or whatever. And so we had this little, one of our slides was, it just cut to it and you just see a little Gumby guy running across the screen and running back. And you hear him like, and then run back over, and it faded up and said, we'll be right back. And it just was like him trying to figure out what went wrong. And then we had one where he walked up to it and he picked up two cables and put them together. And then you saw like a little Gumby skeleton. He got shocked and he fell over smoking and said, we'll be right back. And we built all these really funny ones. And of course, it never went bad, but the client was like, I almost wish that we could just pull the plug on the show for a second so that we can play these, but no one ever got to see them. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was going to say, back in the ancient days of broadcast, there used to be specific little tools that were signal loss graphic inserters that were on all the broadcast transmitters. So if something bad happened, they would at least be putting that out. I don't imagine those old analog units are still available, but there must be somebody who probably does some sort of inserter like that. I just might do a Google search on signal loss graphic inserter and see what shows up.
Yeah, but I think it's worth paying attention to it. And then the other thing to remember that people don't do very often is that the end graphic is usually something useful. Thank you for watching. Graphic is usually useful. Now, a lot of times we just go to black, but one of the things that you can do is have an end graphic with a call to action, because the folks that stayed all the way to the end of your show are the most committed to your show. And so you definitely want to let them know how to get to where something new. So the end graphic with a call to action, a QR code, that type of thing is really useful. Next question.
Hazmik Ajar in Cape Town says, investing in staff certification on AE and other NLE tools, can the panel recommend online learning portals? Seriously looking at Stack Skills. Regular price is $200 per course. Mashable's special right now is $89 after offer for all courses for a lifetime subscription. Any thoughts?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I've used Lydia before for After Effects. Adobe itself has lots of training. I mean, it's been around so long. There's innumerable training courses out there. The question is, if you get certification, is it one that people would recognize and work for you?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I think you were referring to lynda.com, which is now part of LinkedIn Learning. So you'll find them at LinkedIn Learning. And they did have a lot of good courses and a lot of graphics programs out there. Very well professionally produced. So LinkedIn Learning.
Good, Bill.
I would just make sure that if you can, look at when the lessons were posted, because one thing that's true about this industry is it changes so fast these days. And I can see companies who had a $200 training course that they produced 5 or 7 years ago, and they're trying to just get some more life out of it, lowering the price down into the basement. But will it show how things work today? There's been so much change in all these tools. I've been surprised that Apple has just, for example, revved their certifications with big gaps in between, because clearly they're bringing them into the new era with the new techniques that actually work today, as opposed to what happened in 2 versions ago.
Yeah, I don't, and especially if it's your own staff, I don't see why certification matters. It's good for the staff, I guess, to have a bunch of pieces of paper. But I guess maybe if you're trying to get something from the government and they want to see certifications, but like the actual piece of paper, once you've already hired them and decided they're worth it, the actual piece of paper is kind of worthless. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I don't think anybody has ever asked me for any of my certifications. I never looked at them like it was something for me or for a client that I didn't have. I looked at it in terms of getting into a structured learning program that hopefully was done by sensible educators who forced me really to look at all aspects of a complex program, even the areas that I wouldn't have normally gone through. When I originally got certified in Final Cut, I had been using it already for 3 or 4 years, and I thought I was very good at it. But I realized that they took me to places that I don't normally go and forced me to look at those aspects of the program. And when later on I needed to suddenly, I don't usually do that, but I remembered where it was because of that structured learning. So they have that small bit of value for me.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I used to frame and put those certifications up on the walls in the studio, and then I decided it was bad for sound.
Very good. Yeah, I don't have any certifications at all, like all the way back to high school. All right, next question.
Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia. He says, is there some educators, I guess, plural, who are out of school now, and Alex and the panelists can explain how the telestrating hardware and software is working?
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I wanted you to share that because I think that there are some great use cases for educators as well as houses of worship. And I think it's still magic. So I was hoping you.
Sure. Absolutely. I'll do it real quick. We are much closer to having a version that we can distribute. Just letting you know that this is, the software is we have someone in the group that is rewriting the software to make it more stable and adding features and all kinds of other things. So it should be pretty slick, and it should be done in the next month or two. So what I have is a Wacom tablet, and this is what's called a Wacom One, I believe. It's not the Cintiq. The Cintiq is more expensive. So it has two things that it inputs. One is a USB, and the other is HDMI. So the HDMI is what shows up on the screen, and the USB, of course, is how you communicate with the computer to put the drawing in there. What actually happens here is that the Wacom tablet is connected. The USB goes to a Mac Mini, and that's what's running the software. The HDMI is actually coming in from a ATEM. So the ATEM output goes into here. The Mac Mini's HDMI goes into the ATEM. And so what you can see, this is the ATEM here. And so the Mac Minis goes into here as a black and white image. In fact, if I cut to this, you can see, I will cut. There's it's green because I'm keying it over, but it's just a black and white image that's there. So that goes in and it's used as a downstream key. And then the output of the composite, so my program output that composites those two together, goes back into the Wacom tablet. And then, of course, now I have it in program. So that's it's a really simple program as far as that goes. You can do it without it. You can just key it over if you have something that you can draw on, like an iPad or something like that. The key here is that I can see it. So I can, when I'm drawing, that I can see what I'm drawing. And but the cost is really the Mac Mini and the Wacom tablet. Now with the new iPad, the driver kit, there's potentially a way that we could have video going into the iPad to do that. But that's remains to be seen. But we think that it potentially we could do it all in one thing down the road. So we'll see. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Please let us know when we can pre-order it. Mainly because I hear there's a killer live support every day.
Yeah, exactly.
7 days a week available to us.
Yeah, exactly. It is Yeah, I'll let you know. It's going to be very expensive. It's going to be at least, I don't know, $5 or something like that. So to run it. So next question.
Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia, is right back again with, are there other colleges doing the Swift coding course in public as Ohio State University is doing?
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I'm kind of throwing the ball to myself. So I wanted to share
We
this.
like to call that a Cochrane. Throwing a Cochrane.
So this is Ohio State. They started this prior to the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, they've accelerated making it public. So it's Swift program to the public. And this, I think, is absolutely amazing that they're doing this. It is a certified program, but you can do this with getting an app from the Apple Store that is Ohio State and is making a certified certificate program that teaches students how to code and build in the App Store. There's also the Swift Coding and Apple Development Certification Program that is also available. And there are 3,000 OS students and faculty and staff that are enrolled in this program.
And how much does it cost?
It's free to the public.
That's cool.
It's self-paced.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other university, but I was just curious as to whether or not the panel knew.
There's a lot. I don't know about the coding one specifically. I know that MIT, Harvard, Yale all do different versions of something that are available online to watch. I don't know if it's a certification program, but I do think that they, different colleges have different things where you can audit the courses. And learn from them without necessarily what you're paying for when you go there is the degree. And the reality is, what you pay for in most colleges is the network of people who graduated. so that's so there's still a value to the college. I think that as a way to, I think that what it does do is it provides them a way to get to high school students who might be interested in figuring out what college they want to go to. And also you can, a mixture of being able to see people before they get there, as well as being able to, promote yourself to it. I think that there's a real opportunity for a lot of colleges to build programs like this that are really aimed at high school students where, it could even be something that helps you get into that college if you're participating successfully in their online programs. It's a great way to kind of sift through lots of people to see, it's easier for them to do an SAT or have good grades in high school or whatever, but you could be giving them things that allow you that are both a service to them and a test for you. So I think that those are things that are real opportunities for both colleges and companies. I mean, I think that colleges are going to have to get much more aggressive about attracting students because a lot of the corporations are starting to go right after the high school students directly. Like the Grow with Google, even Swift Playgrounds is aimed at building capacity long before building capacity in the format that you want it in, as opposed to the format that they're getting. So it's an interesting puzzle. Next question.
Next one comes from Dave in Alexandria, Virginia. There is lots of you can be a voice announcer content online, but much of it is about building a business. Can you recommend resources for a newbie to learn the craft of voice performance itself?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'd like to back up that question just a little bit and address your point that it's building a business. Voiceover is a tough business to break into and achieve full business status. In other words, a voiceover artist that's making a living and paying the bills by being a voiceover artist. I've done it for 50 years, and I don't think I could depend upon the income I get from it to keep life going and paying my mortgage and all that. There's only a handful of people that really do well at it enough to be able to accomplish that. Joe Cipriano's a friend of mine out in Hollywood, and he does Fox and a bunch of movie trailers like Don LaFontaine did back in the day. All those guys. How did they get there? I don't think they went to a resource. I just think that they exercised and practiced and did the right things over and over and over again. And as you do that, you can loosen up. I think a lot of people have the misconception if they have a deep voice that immediately they're a voiceover artist. You've got the tools to become a voiceover artist, but you aren't necessarily automatically enrolled into the world of being a voiceover artist. So it's all for the most part, rinse and repeat. So if you can find a website that can teach you that, great. I haven't seen one.
I always think of when a voiceover artist is that a deep voice does help. It's kind of like, you don't have to be 6'7" to play basketball, but it sure makes it a lot easier. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the voiceover business has changed radically in the last 10 or 15 years. Used to be, all the major voiceover artists were represented by agents in Hollywood, and they got you those jobs. Now there's kind of a meat market on the internet. And it's the lowest common denominator. But if you do want to learn about the fundamentals, there are plenty of teachers out there who used to teach in-person voiceover classes. And a voiceover website or a training website isn't really helpful to you because they can't hear your voice. It can't hear your voice and give you critique on your technique. There's a guy that I've taken a couple of voiceover classes from called William Williams, and he has a company called Aliso Creek Productions Voiceover, and he teaches voiceover classes. And now, since the pandemic, he's been teaching them via the internet. So he signs up courses, and he does have these Saturday sessions where you can pay like $50, and it's a small class of about 5 to 6 people. I guess in his virtual class, in his in-person classes, they were 5 or 6 people. And in his virtual classes, he probably limits them to around 10 or so. And you have to have a pretty good setup like we do here on office hours with a microphone. And so a good microphone and Zoom and a good internet link. And he gives you the basic pointers of how to, not only the business of voiceover, but the techniques of voiceover and how to how your voice could be applied and what kind of voiceover work you could do after he listens to your voice, and will critique you and tell you what possible avenues you have for marketing it.
Good, Bill.
Business is really different now than it was when I was most active during the course of the years that I made probably 30 to 50% of my income. It was only ever that for me because I was not in a major market, but I did really well in the sub-markets that I was in. I will tell you, there are a couple of things that people don't understand about it. Number one, to be a good voiceover artist means you're available when the producers want you, which often means you can't work a full-time job and be a voice talent, which means that if you're not fully booked, you're sitting around for that 2:00 on Tuesday session that the ad agency wanted you for. And that means that if you have a full-time job, you've got to arrange it around that. Not many people can do that, which is one of the things that makes a lot of people kind of working amateurs who are doing something else, but who can also do this. The other thing is that it's just, all these Voice 123 type aggregators have changed the nature of the business tremendously. A lot of people believe that, well, I'm out of work, I could do that. And they try to do it, and they run into these things about it being nowhere near as simple as it looked. All that said, there is far more opportunity. There are far more types of work being done. I mean, when you think about it, we used to just have radio spots. Maybe there was some narration if you were around a big company. And there weren't the video game side of things. There weren't all the automated phone systems and things like that. There weren't translation and re-speaking and all these things. So there are more opportunities now, but you really do have to be good, and you have to dedicate yourself to it, and it's got to fit with your lifestyle, I think.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, what I just heard Courtney and Bill say makes a lot of sense. And rather than me be negative and say it's a tough thing and you got to spend years and years to get into it, what can you do right now? You can go to your local radio station and volunteer your voice. If you want to learn some things, you can take Courtney up on his advice, or you can go to the local theater group and learn via theater. Theater is more and more being used for voiceover people as opposed to announcer voices. It's more acting than it is announcerish in terms of presentation. That's what they're looking for. There's a company out in North Carolina called Procom that represents and provides voiceover services. And they have a subsidiary called Voice Jungle, which I'm part of, which is just about everybody's on there, and they handle everything. You don't get paid a lot, but it's again, rinse and repeat. Yeah,
I always think of, your voice is still an instrument that you need to figure out how to use well. I listen to my daughter she's learning about 3 instruments at the same time, guitar, bass, and piano. And I listen to her do it over and over and over again. And she'll do that for years before she could ever make any money. doing it. So you really have to think about it. It's not a quick get rich scheme. I got into voiceovers because I started interning at a radio station, and they said, "Hey, you sound like you have a pretty good voice." And they're always looking for new voices because they had it was a very, very small station, and they had a handful of people that did all the commercials. And so they wanted to add, and they gave me a commercial, and I spent a weekend working on it because I wasn't very good, and I put it, I slowly put it together. I then moved into I did do it full time for a while, but I didn't generally do it as a voiceover talent. I added value to it, which it means that I bought this thing that had just come out a couple months before I went into it called Pro Tools. It had just been released, and I could cut ads really fast compared to what anybody else could do with a reel-to-reel. And so I did the whole commercial. so basically, you would call me if you needed a commercial done, and I had an EMU Emacs, and I had Pro Tools, and I was probably the only one in all of the Western Pennsylvania that had one, and I could punch out a really high quality ad that would normally cost you 10 times more. With my, just sitting in my bedroom, doing it, and so I was selling the whole ad, and I just happened to be the voice talent for it. Over time, I got work doing character voices, and so character voices I think are really hard if you don't grow up in a family that watches a lot of Saturday Night Live. So my family, you didn't get any attention if you couldn't do 10 or 15 different Saturday Night Live characters. And so it's like learning a language in the sense that if you don't really push your voice to go down those paths before you're 13 or 14 years old, it's really hard to build character voices. I think most people that I know that do characters, that are actors and so on and so forth, started pretty early. Like they started being goofy, early on. They didn't pick it up later. And so I think that stretched it out. And character voices are much easier to get a job for than straight voices. That's what I found, was that it was really hard unless I was in my late 50s. It was going to be really hard. I had my voice teacher was the person who did the Tootsie Roll commercial for those of us old enough, 1, 2, 3. And he said, your voice is going to be great when you hit about 55. And he said, if you start smoking, it'll be better when you hit 45. So I've been waiting. I'm almost there. I'm almost there to find out if my voice actually turns out. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, there's also all these
and real quick,
niches.
we've been waxing on, so just like 10 seconds.
Think about performance in terms of the talking book stuff. Yeah. That has been amazing. If you go on Audible and listen to some of it, one human will do 10 characters, keep them all distinct. Yeah. Sometimes accents and authenticity is important in that, but there's a lot of different ways to make a buck doing this.
The number one group of people that I've seen that other than actors in Hollywood that are on The Simpsons or something like that, is reading books. Book reading is a big business if you're good at it, and it's really hard. I tried one and I was like, okay, this is not for me. This is too many words. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and if you want to do voiceover for animation, it used to be you'd have to take a personal course from somebody. And you'd have to live in Hollywood or New York or somewhere where these people actually live to take those personal coaching courses. But now, because of COVID, a lot of them are doing them online. One guy that does a lot of voices is Bob Bergen, and he is only doing coaching because of COVID on Zoom right now. So he's the voice of Porky Pig for Warner Brothers and hundreds of other animated cartoons. And so you can get, and it is kind of pricey. It's about $300 an hour for his personal coaching, 1-to-1. But if you want to do cartoon voiceover animation, there are a number of talents that are in that particular field that you can actually hire them on an hourly basis to coach you in doing cartoon and character voices.
And a lot of those coaches they're tied in to the entertainment industry, and so a lot of times producers will come to those kinds of coaches and say, hey, do you got a couple people that might be good? And they're like, this one's a particularly good one. This one is a good one. So it's a great way to get into the business is to have a high profile teacher that also places people.
But typically they will say, no, I can do that voice.
Sometimes it's just, sometimes they can. A lot of them are getting next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, what do you think of Apple placing ads in Apple Music playlists to cross-promote their own content? And he's got an example there in the link.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, if I wanted to do that, listen to the radio.
I guess what the funny thing is I just don't listen to anybody's playlists. I listen to my own playlists. I don't have any playlists that I listen to from somebody else. And so I wasn't even conscious that it was happening. Next question.
Dennis Swotek looks like in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. Will this Alex Telestrator work with a Wacom Intros Pro?
It'll work with any of the Wacoms. The main thing is whether you want a Cintiq or the Wacom one. I think the Intuos, I believe, do not have screens in them. But if they do, it's hard to tell with Wacom and how they use their names. So if they do, it's fine. But otherwise, it's the only thing that makes mine work particularly nicely, in my opinion, is that when I draw, I actually have I can see it. It's just harder to do it without that. Next question.
Hasmik Kajar, a friend in Cape Town, South Africa, says, held an orientation meeting for the medical event, checked everything 2 hours before the meeting. Once I launched the Zoom meeting, however, Zoom would not recognize the ATEM Extreme. Powering the ATEM down and on did not fix it. Had to reboot the N1 and then it worked. Any thoughts as to why this might have happened?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, welcome to the world of the ATEM, because it just has some weirdness that sometimes loses contact with its host. And sometimes it'll blank the video, too. It's the infamous gray screen from ATEM. The only fix is you just got to pull the plug on it and bring it back up.
Well, it looks like he did that, and then he had to reboot his Mac Mini as well, which is an unusual thing to do. I've never had to do that. So I've always, I believe that it's a bit issue. There's some bit that's flipping, because I believe that it's I think it's every 32 times I join something that I have, or 64, but it seemed to be one or the other, and I couldn't quite remember. So I'm trying to annotate it. I'm just so busy, but I feel like when it gets attached a certain number of times, it decides, okay, I can't do that again. I don't know why. Anyway, so, but I think that, and I don't know whether it's the switcher or the computer, how that works. So, but you did all the right things, which is to reboot everything. That's the way to solve many problems in life. The ones you can reboot. So good, Courtney.
Yeah, probably if you're coming out of the ATEM with your USB cable and going into the Mac Mini, it's the USB list of available AV ports that is enumerated in that USB manifest. And so unplugging the USB cable and plugging it back in at the Mac side, a lot of times will reinitiate that, rebuild the list, and that can do it for you. So if that doesn't work, of course, you did the right thing and rebooted.
Next question.
Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn says, morning, guys. We stumbled upon the Orange Pi the other day and wanted to know your thoughts on it. Also, any idea when our next Pi lab will be?
And do we know what distinguishes an Orange Pi over? I've never had Orange Pi. I've had a lot of apple pies, blueberry pies, but not any Orange Pies. It looks like another Pi build that's here, so it's a slightly adjusted Pi. I don't have any specifics that understand what the difference would be for this. Go ahead, Courtney.
It's a different system on a chip and has different connections on it. I think it's a Mali. There's an Orange Pi 800, an Orange Pi Plus LTS, and they make cases for them. So it's just a different implementation of what the Raspberry Pi is, only it's a little more capable. It usually has a little more inputs and outputs and better video a lot of times.
Go ahead, John.
I'm not going to answer the question, but I appreciate Seventh Scroll, if it's a he or a she or a them, saying good morning to us every time they ask a question.
Very good. And we're working on trying to get the labs set up again. So stay tuned for that. Next question.
I need the meringue interface personally. Hasmik Kajar in Cape Town says, in next week's medical event, one presenter will be joining from New York. All the other presenters come to the studio. How can I bring the one into the meeting and still have them control their slide deck and have super sources into the program speaker's slide?
Go ahead, Chris.
It seems like there's multiple questions there, Hasmuk. I like what Mr. Laporte does in terms of having a monitor on set. So if you have a bunch of people on stage and one person's coming in via Zoom or something, put a monitor to represent that person. That's half of your question, or maybe a third of it. The controlling slides, there are, what I would recommend doing is that you put their slide deck on a local machine and let them control it remotely. And I just used something called OctaQ yesterday, and it's a little bit of a back and forth to make it work, but because you have to like install something on the receiver and then they have to have a website open on their site. What I would recommend is that you send a signal and actually let an operator control it, because it's one of these things. Alex has talked about this in the past where the software might work, but what happens when the talent clicks, doesn't see what they want to see immediately, and then clicks again and then gets impatient. All of a sudden you've received 6 clicks to go forward. So that's the other half, I think, of your thing. And the super source, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about.
Well, that's just having a signal that they can do the super source with. I think that there's a couple different ways to approach this. One is the way we do it a lot is with Zoom rooms, because a Zoom room can put out up to 3 outputs. And one of those can be the person, and another one can be their slides. So they can do a slide share from their perspective. You're out of the Zoom room able to pull a full frame of them as well as a full frame of that and put it into your switcher. So that's the easiest way to do it. Zoom ISO, of course, will do that as well. So you can get both of those outputs from somebody from using Zoom ISO. But the Zoom room is the easiest one to set up currently, to just use that, and it costs, I don't know, $40 or something like that a month, and turn it on and turn it off or whatever. But then you now have those 2 isolated outputs and potentially another one if you want it. So that I would go down that path. But we pull it here when people do screen shares. We're capable of doing that here with Zoom ISO.
How does that work with Zoom ISO? Do you
magic? I'm pretty sure it's literally dark.
And do they do a screen
magic
share on their end?
If you do a screen share, we see it. We have access to that. I don't know how to do it. I just know that our system can do it because we use it here in this show. So I know that somebody has figured that out.
Okay.
And so, but
play with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's a pretty slick thing. Next question is from Douglas. Oh, sorry, it's not Sunday.
And Douglas Carmichael has a question on the Prophet 5 synth from Sequential. He says it has a mono output that precludes the use of pan spread or similar per voice panning features. Could the Waves PS22 or a similar pseudo stereo plugin create a pleasing effect?
I hate to say it, but it's a Tuesday question. It's a Carl question. That's the kind of thing that we need Carl for, I think. Or maybe Courtney. Courtney might be able to do it. Good, Courtney.
Well, yes, there are a lot of DSP echo, or you can add effects that are in stereo to your to any mono signal, like my microphone there. And there are a lot of effects, like the wave effects, that can bounce them back and forth and delay the echo from one side to the other. And it gives you a much more spatial effect than just trying to pan it left or right. So it does open it up, and it gives you a pseudo stereo effect from a mono source. But yeah, there's a lot of things, DSP effects, for especially an echo or hall size. All of those use DSP, and they take a mono input and route them with different delays into the stereo field.
And we probably have enough room for another question or two if you want to finish out the top of the hour. Go ahead. Next question.
Jonas Dautel, our friend from Stuttgart, Germany, is up next. He says, what's the longest show without a break you'd do before needing to switch out your technical director and or crew?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
There's a lot of conversation between the unions about this, because people have been harmed driving home late at night, falling asleep at the wheel, things like that, which has changed the way things go. And I'll leave it to Courtney to explain the union's thought on it. But my thought is 10 hours is about the longest amount of time I would ask any member to do. And it's a very stressful job, because you have to concentrate for a full 10 hours. So pushing it past that means you need to have a backup there.
Good, Chris.
Yeah, I think of baseball, and getting to that 9th inning as a TD without being able to get up and go take a break is pretty hard sometimes. And I will also say, I used to work for a guy who would book a crew for 2 shows back to back, and he would get a hotel room upstairs, and he'd say, go take a shower and change your shirt and come back and smile. We're keeping you on the clock. It's not the best practice, but
it happened.
that's what you run into sometimes.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I think the union rules are you got to have a meal break at least every 6 hours. So I wouldn't want to push anybody past 6 hours. But I used to work on these telethons. If you work on a telethon, like the March of Dimes telethon, which we used to do, was 24-hour straight live television, and muscular dystrophy, of course, the Jerry Lewis telethon. They would bring in, there'd be one director, and he would work most of the show, and after about 8 or 10 hours, he'd take a break, and somebody else would relieve him in the middle of the night, and he'd come back in after he goes and takes 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and comes back and tries to finish the show, so there's some kind of continuity. But yeah, we would switch out the crew about every 5 or 6 hours to an alternative, and then the crew that was working goes and rests, and then they'll usually come back and pick up again. So, but those 24-hour telethons are pretty much a thing of the past.
I've worked on some that are 24, 48, 72-hour shows, and they're they are usually telethons or something like it. One of the things that we do is we definitely swap people out. We usually swap them out at 8 or 10 hours. Now they have breaks. We have people that can come in. Usually people get really good at breaks with play out. You'd be surprised at how important playback is. So playback is a very valuable thing to have around and have handy to be able to, people, one of the biggest mistakes they make in live events is not having enough playback. Playback lets the entire crew breathe. And so long play out clips like 7 minutes, 8 minutes are golden. That lets people do bio breaks. It lets them grab something to eat. It lets them do a bunch of other things when you're doing these really long ones. And so having packages is not, when we approach it, having packages is not something that's, that'd be great to add production value. It is a key piece of us being able to handle, be able to manage a live event. The other thing that we do is we shoot lots of time lapses. The reason we do it is not because, partially because I think time lapses are amazing, but it's because I can jump to it and people will still watch. You'd be surprised at how long people will watch a time lapse. You don't lose any, and sometimes we gain viewers by putting time lapses from the content that we had before. So time lapses are kind of they're kind of eye magnets, and people will just sit there and watch things if you grab them. And so, but having things that you can throw to that are not time continuous, like it's not 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 45 seconds. It's as long as I turned it on, is something that's valuable if we have some kind of emergency. So those are things to think about. The other thing we do is we stagger crew breaks. So we don't switch out a whole crew at 8 hours. We switch out the TD at 7 hours and one of the camera ops at 7.5 hours and another camera. Like you slowly work through that rather than a full show. That's how I do it anyway. That we slowly work through the shifting of the crew so that we don't lose continuity. Like there's not a whole bunch of people all at one time trying to figure out where they are, get their wits about them. So we find that to be a little easier. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia said, did anybody catch the singing rabbi last night on Conversations with Tony Mobley? If not, you missed it.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. And as Rabbi David Paskin says, this was fun. We had fun. It was fun. The conversation, as I said, the conversation was absolutely great. And his singing at the end was, he's a rock and roll rabbi. And so it was really good. So if you get a chance, please watch. Also, I just want to mention that we are looking for volunteers. We've done a lot of different things in terms of conversations with Tony Mobley, but I want to mention that we are Zoom, AWS, vMix, cloud production. And if you have a need to learn how to do that, please come and volunteer.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Hasma Kajar in Cape Town. Again, the medical event. Talent have in-ear monitors from the MixPre HP jack, headphone jack. If there are two people as talent, that is, they are on in the studio and both are on the same camera, how do I split the headphone audio from the MixPre? He tried an audio splitter before and it was horrible. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, there's a bunch of devices out there to help you out. The thing that you really want is a splitter that has separate volume controls for each one of the IEMs, because everybody's volume is going to want to be separate. Go to Sweetwater Sound. If you do a search, you'll probably find everything from the Aphex to Behringer's devices, a ton of them out there.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I got on the wrong page here. Trying to find the answer for you. Anyway, so yeah, the Behringer makes one called, I believe, a P2. that is something that's an XLR. I believe it's XLR in. So this is, you have to decide what your output's going to be. And so Behringer also makes a rack mounted version that has like 8 different channels with it. But yeah, XLR, it's either TRS or XLR in, and it has a headphone jack, and you're able to control it. So the P2 is a pretty good one as far as if you can have a bunch of XLR outs to it. The question is whether you have that, whether you can split that out. Now, if you think through that, you can get like a whirlwind 1 to 6. So you run one XLR out to that, and then you can split it out to 6 of them, run them into these little things, and just put them next to each person, and they can sit there and dial them up and down. So that's the one easy way to do it. A lot of times we've used HX3s, but that brings it all together. That's a sound devices tool that does that. So you do, and then I think that a variety of Rolls and a variety of Behringer have headphone ins that split out to headphones, as Mitchell had talked about as well. The Super Pro version of this is using some version of a Studio Technologies, that either is Dante or XLR in, where you have announcer buttons and so on and so forth. So it just depends on how far you want to push it. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. He says, like Homebridge.io is to Apple HomeKit, is there a DMX equivalent?
I don't know. I don't think there is. Not that I know of. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I've seen mentions in news articles of small African and or Asian TV channels uplinking to satellites like AsiaSat, Eutelsat without the switch or LTN Global. How would they transport their signal to the uplink?
A lot of people have an uplink. It's actually not, in the grand scheme of things, a satellite dish is not that expensive. It might cost you 15 or 20 grand to put a satellite dish on the roof that can uplink a small KU. Now, if you do C-band, it'll get a lot more expensive. So it depends on what you're doing there. But otherwise, the uplink is not super expensive. The encoder will be another $3,000 to $5,000 that's required, and that's usually a 1080i encoder. If you want to go to 1080p, it's a little bit more expensive. So it's that individual cost of hardware, especially if we're going to do it 24/7, and probably is less expensive that way. Then the next step is that you buy space on a transponder. So a satellite has a whole bunch of transponders on it, and when you push it up, you're buying that time, and typically that time might be anywhere from $150 to $300 an hour to have that time up there. So it just depends on what you're doing there and how you want to put it together. A lot of people do use the switch in LTN or even SRT, RTMP. So there's a lot of different ways to get it to an uplink service provider. So you can send it to somewhere that, a lot of them are in Denver. It's very clear skies, and they're really good. If you in just south of Denver, there's this whole patch of uplink dishes that you'll see. That at least there used to be there, because it was really convenient for HBO and a lot of other folks that were there. So you can send it somewhere that will do it, and LTN and the switch are probably the most expensive ways to get it there. Usually, if you're just trying to do that kind of thing, SRT will work pretty well. Zixi as well as RTMP. So those are a bunch of different ways to get it to that provider. So you could send it to a provider that already has all the hardware. The nice thing about that is they're maintaining the satellite dishes. They're keeping track of all those things. So that saves you the trouble, but it does cost you a little bit of money. Next question.
Tony Mobley is back from Newnan, Georgia with a correction from earlier. He says, my error, the cost of the Ohio State University Swift coding class is $1,600 US for all 4 parts.
Which makes way more sense. And it's great. It's a great business model. It's very scalable. Next question.
Hazmi Gajar in Cape Town is back with internet up, down, varies depending on where the server sits. Which server would you select for a Zoom meeting, and can one select a server?
I think that there's an option now of selecting additional servers for Zoom. I don't know that for sure, though. It definitely will depend on when it enters the internet. Or where it enters the server, where it's trying to push you to. So I would test it and pick the one that does the best. All right. We are now jumping to the second hour, and we are going to be discussing WWDC. And this is really amongst our panel. We don't have developers on today, but I think that what we want to do is talk a little bit about, we've had WWDC running, and we've covered it about as well as we're going to cover it this year, and talked a lot about those. So the question for the panelists is, what did you see that you're excited about? What do you think is something that is the most important aspects of what we're doing? And also, if you're watching, if you're a producer watching, definitely ask questions or post what you think are the most impactful things that we saw. A lot of times, this stuff you'll see stuff announced that isn't that big of a deal right now, but we think will become a big deal over time. Go ahead, Bill.
I was a little surprised at how many announcements in the keynote for WWDC this year were related to developer issues, but weren't specific. They were like forward-looking, like the Apple for payments at no interest. I mean, Apple's getting into kind of the finance business there, and I'm sure that'll be really good for the developers who are selling products to let people purchase into more expensive software or tool sets or whatever without that interest charge. But it also tells me that Apple is sitting on so much money that they are seriously considering being more and more in the financial side of things, and that you will be able to, they are trying to make it as frictionless as possible to utilize their products and services up to and including getting involved in the financial side of acquiring them.
It does appear that the new multi-payment, which is fine for developers, but what it really is, it's a big deal for retailers. So for a small retailer, to be able to do a payment system. So I did a little bit of research on this over this week. So right now, there's a lot of companies that do that, but it costs the retailer money to because they're basically paying the service charge. So you're paying the same amount as a customer, but it's costing a certain percentage of that sale to the vendor, to the retail owner. What Apple's doing is not charging anybody for it. So they're literally giving you free money on these payment systems. And you probably ask, I think I mentioned this yesterday or the day before, it's the Kaiser Soze model, which is that you always paid more than the job was worth, and so because what that meant is that they're making money somewhere else, not on the transaction. What they're making money on is making the iPhone the best solution for it because you're paying for that, and so it's a very complicated model there to do that. But if I was in financial services, Apple doing what they're doing there would terrify me because I can't compete with it because they're playing a game that I can't. I don't have iPhones. I can't sell people iPhones. I can't sell people the ecosystem. And so without that, Apple can do it without any cost. Now, this is where I do think that Apple risks a lot. This is exactly what antitrust is designed to, it's leverage, using your market position in one place to push it into another is a dangerous thing to do. And so Apple has to do it very carefully and very slowly, because they're basically going to make it inhospitable for others to have a financial market, if Apple keeps on going after this. I mean, this is a really big business too. It's, tens of billions of dollars of transactions. And so it's not a small market that Apple's kind of moving into. And Apple fundamentally is bigger than most of the financial institutions. They can play harder than almost anybody else in this area. They have more cash than the banks do. Go ahead, John.
I watched a ton of the sessions. I didn't sign up for any of the labs, but the sessions were all TEDified. They were all 16 to 18 minutes in length.
And wasn't it great?
It's better, but they were homogenized. There wasn't a lot of meat there. They were basically overview videos.
Well, weren't they? I didn't think they had any less meat than the ones that we saw in the in-person sessions. I mean, all of these are the design of all of these videos are really an overview so you understand what it is. And then there's always links to a ton of documentation, that here's all the documentation. The problem really is with building in videos is it's really hard to do the video again, or the live performance again. And so a lot of times it's really designed as what will stay the same. We want you to go to the web page with it because it's flexible. Like we can update it and change it. And so I think sometimes you don't put as much detail into the video, but I don't know if it it still felt like, at least the ones I watched, and believe me, I watched a lot of WWDC stage sessions. And so I didn't feel like we were getting less information. I did feel like it was a little bit more efficient, especially Apple finally added, I think they did this last year, but they added being able to watch it at a different speed. For a long time, you were stuck with 1x. And I had to I had a plug-in. It was really, the irony of it was I would watch all the WWDC videos in Chrome, because Chrome has a plug extension that lets you accelerate any video that's that's in a web page. And so I could accelerate those because I was like, I can't watch these at 1x. And so I will say the cleaner audio in the sessions means I can watch at 1.75, because they really do talk really slowly. I think they must get coached to talk slowly. It's really, that's the one thing, I cannot watch any of the sessions at 1x, because they talk so deliberately to make sure that you understand it. At 1.75, to me, it sounds almost normal. Go ahead, Courtney.
Getting back to the Apple Pay question, Apple Pay over time, I saw that and I went, well, what kind of a business model is that? There's no charge, you can't make money on it. But you realize it's like a loss leader item. It's to lure people into Apple Pays, and to use Apple Pay, you have to have an Apple piece of hardware. So you got to have an iPhone or a tablet or something or a card from them to use it. So it lures more people into that, so they sell more hardware. I don't think it's going to stick around for very long, because, like I say, it's not a sustainable business model unless they're getting enough increase in sales of hardware from luring people in with that loss leader. It's just like when Fry's used to order or Best Buy will offer a store brand TV for under their cost. So they're shipping out $30 or $40 with every unit they sell, but it gets people into the store and it gets them to buy other things and gets them in the custom of going and shopping at that store.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if it goes away. I think that Apple doesn't need it to ever make money. I think that they're making so much money right now that they are giving it back to their investors. They're like, we don't need this. I mean, here's another $15-20 billion we made this quarter that we're just going to give back to you because it's not necessary. I don't think Apple will do that forever either. I think that essentially Apple has used the dividends and the stock buybacks as a way to buy time. So they're between big releases of products and they're buying time with the investors. And it's not just we say, okay, well, they're paying more to Warren Buffett, but the most important investors at any company are the employees that have stock options. If your stock options start going south, the employees leave. And so the thing is that the reason these companies spend so much time worrying about their chart position, so to speak, is because of the employees, not because of the general investors. And so they have to keep bumping that up. And so Apple's essentially distributing money to their employees, and some investors are getting money too. And so so that's I think that they're buying time with it. But I think that these kinds of things, I don't think that they'll go away from that. But what they are getting people to do is use Apple as a bank. And I think that without calling it that, and so with the credit card, with the distributed payments, with the ability to Apple Pay, just, when I am constantly have a couple $100 in my Apple Pay because I'm guaranteed if anything goes wrong with my credit card or my ATM card or whatever. What really got me into it is I had someone I had some kind of fraud issue with my ATM card, and it suddenly got shut off, and suddenly I was a little, so I had to wait a couple days to get that turned around, and I didn't necessarily want to use the cards that I had, and I had Apple Pay, and I happened to have $300 or $400 in Apple Pay that someone had paid me back something, and I just used that, and I was like, it was super simple. I didn't have to type any numbers in. I didn't have to do any, I just done, and that's when that was the real shift for me, where I do most of my paying for things that I don't need to keep track of, even though it does keep track of it, but I don't. If it's on business, I just do it all with Apple Pay, and so I think that I think Apple is getting us to a point where we would consider them a financial institution. They're just doing it very slowly. Go ahead, Bill.
The other thing about Apple is they have always looked to decrease friction for the use of their products. I think this is a massive one. And in this respect, no matter what you want, if it's as easy as a click because you already have a financial backend that's been provided for you in place that is over a reasonable amount of time, it's zero interest, you're more likely to do that. I think that's why Apple won against Napster and all the rest of those in these days. Yes, it was $1.99. Nobody cared about that. What they cared about was how fast you could click that, get your song, get it on your device, the iPod back then, and get satisfied. And so reducing that, I have to go to Napster and I have to figure out the format and I have to download it and then I have to put it on something. Just all that went away and it was click and I got what I want at a price I can afford. This makes it look like the price is zero. I understand that it's not, but that frictionless transaction really does drive behavior. And I think, if they go into like cars and stuff like that, someday you may be able to order your car and your watch, and some guy will find out where you are because of your watch or your phone and bring it to you and just say, here, we're going to program it to your phone and drive off your old car. And that's all the friction and everything we hate about buying cars disappears.
Well, and I think the other thing is if they actually sell a car and with the headsets and the phones and everything else, Apple could be a bank where they're paying interest to people that are putting money into those accounts. And the only thing that those money in like your savings account and other people's savings accounts, the only thing it's paying for is people buying. They're using the money to loan to people buying their own products. It's completely a closed system. Like it. And no company in the world has ever been able to do that. Is literally build a completely closed cash system where they don't need any external inputs. So it's a very fascinating model. The other thing that I think was really important was the passcodes. So we can talk about a lot of the great features and all the other things, but getting rid of passwords and making it biometrically contained is a big deal. Like it is, there's a reason that not many people in a banking institution with $10 million of liquid capital lose their money. And the reason that they don't lose their money is because when you put $10 million into Bank of America, they send you a little camera, a little biometric kit that literally is doing iris scan. Now I've seen it. I do not have that money. just when I say that, I've seen that it exists. I've talked to it about someone at Bank of America about it, but I've never gotten to experience it myself. Maybe someday. So anyway, but that using biometric for all of us is a big deal. And being able to prove that you are who you say you are is going to be a big deal. It's also important. It also shows you with the financial, with the health, with the passcodes is why it's so important that you have a company that's dedicated to privacy, because it's much more invasive unless they protect you as well. And so I think that Apple's going down the right path with those pieces. And I think I was surprised. I will say before we jump into the questions. I was surprised we saw so little in AR and VR. There are definitely some updates. So if you look at it yesterday, there was some updates about Hydra. The way that Hydra is a process by which it uses to render. So basically, it abstracts. It puts an abstraction layer. So you have your scene. You push it into Hydra or I think it's I can't remember, Spark. I think. Anyway, what you can do is you can have I want a very high quality render or I want a real time render, and this can switch between the two and manage those renders. I mean, that's kind of a very rough overview. You can look at it. It's not a very long video. So some of the rendering, I think, has been updated, and there have been some updates to the quality of Reality Converter. So there's lots of subtle things that needed to get done, but I was expecting more features, from what they did. Let's go to the first question.
Douglas Carmichael's up with it, and he says, do you think we're going to see an M2 Mac Mini soon? B&H kind of leaked it before the keynote, he notes.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I doubt it, because it would erode their studio machine, which they just introduced, which is kind of like a tall Mac Mini.
It might. Because the M2 is only incremental in its increase, in its speed increase. I don't know how much it would impact the studio. The studio, I still have more RAM in. I still have more raw power in the studio than I would have with a Mac Mini. So even with the M2, because the M2 was only a 20% bump in most things.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of disappointed in the fact that it was only 18% and up to 18%. So it wasn't even always 18%, depending on how much power you're trying to conserve in there. So it's more of just like a speed bump in the Intel series, yearly speed bump than anything else. It wasn't really a radical departure from the M1 or a radical increase in the number of cores. Same number of CPU cores, and and just one version with an additional 2 GPU cores, and that's really about the only difference in the increase in onboard RAM. Other than that,
it's more efficient than the M1. From a cost to run it perspective and heat perspective and power load perspective. The other thing that was interesting, of course, is that they incorporated the H264, H265 Apple ProRes chip processing right into the chip, so everything gets that, and that really, for a lot of us that do video, is important. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, well, if I were a betting man, I think I would probably say October, but I was disappointed because I did see the B&H leak and was very surprised that they did not come out with this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how that spins out, because B&H doesn't have any reason to build a page if it doesn't exist. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I'm looking at the M1 Pro and M1 Max, and to me, it just kind of doesn't make sense that, this just came out over a couple of months ago, and I just don't see them doing the M1.
But I don't think the Mac Mini has really been updated over the last couple of months. So the Mac Mini itself is a solid, I think, a year old now. Like, I don't think that they've done any major update to it. So it is more new. The Studio is new, but I don't think that they've done any major update to the M1s for a year.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make, Alex, is that I don't think that they need to do anything to the M1 Mac Mini right now, because it does what it does so well.
It does, except that I will say that the problem that you have when you do with these new chips, the problem you really have with this is it'll freeze everybody up, which is that, like, I don't want to buy anything now. Like, anything I was going to buy, like, I was going to buy more Mac Minis, and now I'm going to hang on as long as I possibly can, because I would rather buy an M2 with the built-in video processing and 24 gigs of RAM instead of 16. So it does kind of freeze up your sales channel. So I don't think that they can go more than 3 months without upgrading the Mac Mini. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they can't, that people will just stop buying them. They'll stop buying the 16-inch MacBooks as well as the Mac Minis, because they're based on a last generation chip. So anybody who knows what they're buying won't buy anything until they see an upgrade now. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I don't think the Mac Mini is ever going to threaten the Studio as far as the market is concerned, but I do want to see the Mac Mini support monitor more.
I don't think it will. I think that's what you buy the Studio for, is to get more of those. I think they definitely will differentiate it by not really extending that out. But I do think that an M2 with 24 gigs of RAM definitely feels like it's part of the Mac Mini future. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, you just wonder whether they're holding off in the Mac Pro, whatever they turn it into. Maybe they'll do that double flip thing that they did with the M1, so that they have a M2 times 2, and that would be an awful lot of compute power as the base, or maybe even multiple sockets of that. I mean, they could turn that into a beast if they wanted to.
Next question.
Next question comes from Juancy Robles in Mexico, down in Mexico City. What is your impression of Room Plan?
Go ahead, John.
So I was really excited when I first saw Room Plan on Tuesday, whenever they released that video. And then after listening to Joshua yesterday talk about him getting underneath the covers to see that wasn't easily accessible for the developers to integrate that into there. That's one of the problems that I have with Polycam, is I never know my model, how complete it is as I'm scanning a room. And that little thing that builds the model down at the bottom would be super useful. So it looks like it's going to be useful. And then if it gave me all of the dimensions, once that's finished, that'd be super, super useful. Yeah,
auto dimensioning would be really useful from a layout perspective. I know with Polycam, I always worry that I'm going to export it out and I don't know if my scale is going to be correct. I literally just did it. I'm about to put, I have an obsession with this thing called Alpha. If you've ever seen Alpha, like putting Alpha shelves in. And the first thing they do is they have you measure your closet or wherever you want to go into it. It's in a container store thing. And so I was like, I finally have have gotten approval from my boss here in the house to upgrade to alpha. And so I was in this morning actually mapping out my closet, and all I had to do is just wave it around and with Polycam, and I've got enough information that I can now, because you have to know exactly. The alpha stuff is very it's precision because you tell them exactly how big it is, and you build it on a computer, and then they send you all the parts that all fit in to make it. You design it all there. So and I was just thinking about how far we've come, because that was a lot of tape measuring, and the way my closet is set up, it'd be very hard to tape measure. And so, so anyway, I think that it is. I think that the room plan will be really interesting, and it does have all that information. It has all the scaling information to it. It does. It didn't look like it was that. You said it. You don't think it was very accessible, because it looked like it was.
Joshua said that yesterday's show, that he said, although they give you this little cool thing on the bottom of the screen, that's not easily accessible to the developers. That's what he said.
Yeah, I think that if you're trying to use it for AR, the way he's probably approaching it, I think it probably would be difficult. Whereas if you're building an app that just does room scanning, that just does something that you're adding on top of it, it did look like it was like 12 lines of code. So, but you have to use it the way Apple designed it, as opposed to your own way to do it. I think is probably the challenge. Next question.
The next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. There have already been notable cases of minors abusing in-app purchases and spending large amounts without their parents' knowledge. Do you think that Apple Pay Later has the same risk of friendly fraud?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It's not automatic. You do have to be approved and apply for the Pay Later plan, and Goldman Sachs or Goldman is handling the credit on that. So it does require, I believe, some approval to sign up for it. So it's not like kids are going to be clicking on, put a new Mercedes on my Apple Pay Later card. I think there'll be some roadblocks to keep you from doing that. At least additional passwords, because it's handled through the Apple Wallet. And so as long as you keep your Apple Wallet passwords private from your children, which you always should do, you might be safe.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I think it's going to get nothing but safer, because obviously now my phone recognizes me through facial recognition. I'm sure it will go into a mode sometime where if it's little Bobby as opposed to dad who's in front of the phone, it will automatically sequester a certain amount of transactional power from that other user. I mean, more and more, whoever's holding the phone is going to be identified at their level of access, as opposed to just get through the front of the phone and anybody who can grab it can use it. I think that's going to start fading away.
Next question.
Tom Ferguson, Phoenix, Arizona. Does anyone attend the State of the Union, and what did you take away?
I had other productions during that time. I didn't watch the whole thing myself. Tom, were you able to watch through it? Yeah, it's usually pretty good. So. I think a couple of us had trouble accessing it, of all things. So there was, like, when it actually happened, I think some of us were having trouble getting to the server. So I don't know exactly what happened there either. So, yeah, it was. I didn't see very much, but I've been mostly watching sessions, and mostly the AR 3D sessions are usually the thing that I spend the most time in. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico City says, anyone see the updates to map kits?
I think the big thing is now developers have a lot more access to using it inside of their tools. Go ahead, John.
Juan, you probably saw my post on Facebook. Remember in the middle of the show that I said, that's not Maryland Parkway? Alex, do you remember me saying that? So after the show, I looked up that address. It's a gas station in Las Vegas, and I posted it on Facebook. I got a ton of comments on it. It's hilarious.
But yeah, so I think that they made it more accessible to developers. So being able to use maps, using the full processing of the maps inside of your apps, I think was the big update that I saw. Next question.
Juan C. Robles is right back again. Hydra as a rendering tool for USD is laying the ground for the developers. Is this laying the ground for the developers to create software for content creation?
I think it's part of it. I mean, the big thing that Hydra, my takeaway from Hydra is that it, and by the way, it's an odd word to use given the whole Marvel universe thing. Every time I see it, I go, so when it finishes rendering, does it say Hail Hydra? Does that make us feel better about using it? So anyway, so as far as a rendering tool, the big thing it does do is let you have very easily and quickly switch between photoreal and real time. And that's to my knowledge, the big thing is being able to switch your rendering pipelines effortlessly. So it should give you the opportunity to build a lot of these things yourself. And it's something that I'm very curious to watch. Apple was very on the Unreal bandwagon. They were on every keynote talking about what they were doing. And then suddenly that, obviously with the lawsuits, stopped. A lot of us have been wondering whether they're going to start bringing Unity on. And they do some stuff in WWDC where they've talked more about Unity integration. But I'm curious as to whether Apple's has decided to go it themselves and keep pushing the USD platform. It's open source, or they're open sourcing lots of the stuff that's out there. And because Apple doesn't need, again, to make money at it, what they need to do is get the content, out of it. And so that's a pretty, again, that should be concerning for a lot of folks that build content, is that you have a big company that just needs the content. And that's problematic from a business model. Next question.
Ron C. Robles from Mexico City back again. Is the JPG inclusion, the JPEG inclusion as format for USD material, a game changer in creating high quality models?
And by the way, we only have another question left. So if you want this to go a little shorter and go into after hours early, just stay the course. Otherwise, you might want to throw some more comments or questions in. I don't know if it's a game changer. It definitely. I mean, we've been able to use JPEGs in the past. The big thing that it does do is allows you to very quickly make those conversions automatically. And so rather than having to rebuild those JPEGs, you can simply have them converted. I do think that there's somewhere in the future where this gets back into what we just talked about, is being able to switch down to JPEGs or switch up to more complex file formats. And so we'll see how that goes. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, comes up with the next one. So how many people have or are planning to install the iOS 16 beta on an M1 iPad specifically?
I am probably going to put it on one. I have 2 iPads, and I'm probably going to put it on one of them. I have the last 2 Pros. I don't think I'm going to put it on the newest one, but I will put it on the last one. I think that's my big plan. Next question.
Christian Turry in London in the UK says, what do you think of passkeys? Apple is notoriously bad at eating their own food. I keep getting asked for my Apple ID password in many instances. Will they really move their own Apple ID to passkeys?
Go ahead, John.
This isn't just Apple. This is industry. In fact, I think Google talked about it at their event a couple weeks back, and they said that Apple was involved. And so Microsoft, Google, and Apple are all on this bandwagon because this new system of passkeys way more secure. It's great for the industry overall. So I really look forward to it. I have big problems with my Apple ID too. I can't log into the developer with my normal Apple ID. I had to create another account. I can log into my Apple TV sometimes. It's just nightmare.
That's the one thing I don't do, is make sure I keep the same Apple ID everywhere, because it's just, as soon as you have 2, it's not a happy experience. I do think that the passkey is going to be a big deal, and it's going to secure many things in the world over time. Again, the big thing is the accountability of privacy and so on and so forth. But it will, I think, close up a lot of hooks that people have had. The number one way you get into someone's system is the password. Phishing the password is the number one way to do that. If you get past that and it becomes biometric, there's an enormous amount of confidence games that are very hard to do if someone can prove that they are who they are. And so if it goes industry wide, all kinds of things, all kinds of scams that people use don't work because they don't have what is necessary to try to prove that they are you. So unless they have a shaving of your finger, and your iris, they're going to have a harder and harder time getting in. Go ahead, Bill.
I think it's going to make a huge difference in areas that we don't even think about. For example, iPhone theft. Why would you steal somebody's iPhone if it's just a brick? If your biometrics aren't tied to it, I mean, there's just it destroys a market for that kind of chicanery. And also, if it does anything to lower 2-factor authentication, and I'm hoping it will, that will be a time saver and a boon to the entire globe. I hate having to click on those little pictures to get into 2-factor authentication things. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I think that being able to take your fingerprint and your voice and your face, those 3 things are hard to, so for the most important things like buying a car with your watch, as was talked about before, be easier to do if we definitely know it's you and if you have a bank account in our bank. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, with Apple making moves into the live streaming event space, would buying or building a live streaming app on macOS be a smart move?
They already have that. It's called the Event app. that is their live streaming. I mean, I don't know about contribution, but they definitely have ways to play it back. The HLS playout on the iOS, tvOS, macOS is definitely one of the easiest to stream to. Next question.
Ryan Raderman, looks like, in Chicago, Illinois, says, why has Apple still not enabled support for multiple user profiles on iPad OS?
I'm going to guess it has to do with security. This gets back into exactly what we talked about before, of having multiple people on the same hardware is not something that, it's not a use case that Apple goes after very aggressively. Next question.
Christian Turi in London, there was not much improvement over Watch OS. Are we ever going to see fully customizable watch face with seconds like Alex and many others like me want?
Sigh. Go ahead, John.
Will they ever license a Rolex face for the Apple Watch? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly.
For Rolex?
I will buy the Apple Watch when they have glucose monitoring built into the watch. That's going to be huge.
Yeah. I will say that I used to have a watch that was more expensive. I mean, the watch that I used on a day-to-day basis was more expensive than the Apple Watch that I have. It's Citizen Nighthawk or something like that. And I really liked it because it had the things that I needed, which is that I could have the UTC time, and then I could have the local time. And then I had another, it had a couple things on it that I needed. And so I used that, and it was only literally, it was that or a Tag Heuer or whatever, it was like that $600 or $400 watch, or it was a $3,000 or $5,000 watch. That they were the only ones that did that, did what I needed it to do. So I owned that watch for a long time in production. And then I got the Apple Watch, in 2015 or whenever it came out. And I have to admit that it's not that I'm excited about the Apple Watch. I don't get excited about the updates, but I think it's really just the timers. Like, that's the funniest part. I was trying to think what really turns it over for me is just I run lots and lots and lots of timers and lots of little alarms and other things like that. I do very little with the rest of the watch. It's really just that one feature that is so easy to use, and I use it a lot, specifically when I work out. So when I work out, all of my sets, I work out and then I have a 90 seconds and then 90 seconds and 90 seconds, and it's so convenient that's what I think probably keeps me in more than almost anything else. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, since I had the very first Apple Watch and then I moved from there to the 7, because the first one did everything I needed up until maybe just under a year ago. But what I saw over the course of time is incremental improvement along those stages, to the point where things that are even niche things, like I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and when I'm out doing fitness walking, I don't want to take my phone with me even. I want to be cut off from everything except just the exercise period. So I run it off my watch, and downloading an Audible book from my phone into the watch is still a relatively not Apple-like thing. You have to sync, and it takes sometimes for a really long novel or something like that. It can take 8 minutes or so for that content. But I just realized it's because they're working with so little memory and this Bluetooth system built into something that is so small that it amazes to me that it works at all. But the incremental improvement, I think they're going to keep going and going and going. These things are going to get nothing but more useful, and it's already made some positive changes in my life.
And I think that the funny thing is the first step was not very high for me to go into something and say, well, I can never go back to anything else. And that's the advantage that they have, because there just wasn't that much competition. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, watches have moved kind of from a utilitarian to a prestige product, the diamond encrusted watches. But once they went to an electronic device, they became much more useful, other than as a prestige product or a luxury product, to be a health monitoring product. And I think this is where the market is going to be in the future, is, as Preto says, monitoring, blood glucose level or something. They may have to have a couple of little fangs that come out of the back of the watch to monitor that blood glucose level. But I think that's where the big increases in the market are going to be, because using it just to tell time or see your emails, as a limited feature now, because you can get like a $25 watch like this one that does every single function that the Apple Watch does for $25. So if you're just using it for utility and not prestige, there's going to be a lot of competition.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, the other thing that astonished me, I was playing with the dog. I think I mentioned this the other day, and I went, hey, and I hit the floor, and my watch went off, and it went, have you fallen? Are you in trouble? And I realized that was going to launch a whole series of things, including my watch knew exactly where I was, so it was probably going to call 911. It was probably going to dispatch a crew to me, if I didn't intervene in the 15 or 20 seconds that it gave me. And I just thought, we got an aging population. There are a lot of us who are getting older. These kind of things, I would not let an older member in my family be that active, particularly if they were on exercise routes and things like that, unless I outfitted them with one of those, because it's exactly that. You trip on a stone, you knock yourself unconscious, and there is a pathway to somebody finding you and giving you assistance without you intervening at all. That's pretty brilliant. That's pretty powerful.
The only warning I get is when I'm watching Steeler games and it says it appears that you're seated and you have a very high very high heart rate. Are you okay? Like I get that during the season. I get that like 3 or 4 times.
I wonder if they get 100,000 alerts of that when the Steelers.
It'd be really funny if we saw stats that suddenly like Steeler. We get 30,000 alerts for Steeler fans. We know who the Steeler fans are because they all have heart attacks at the same time.
The field goal is going to decide the game.
Oddly enough, in the last 5 minutes of every Steeler game, that's a problem. Go ahead, John.
Can you do Apple Pay directly from your Apple Watch?
Yeah, you can.
That's
great.
That's great.
Yeah, no, I go. Yeah,
if I could do Apple Pay from my watch and have my driver's license on my phone,
yeah,
the phone becomes my wallet, my keys, and my phone. So I don't.
You really do carry less stuff. That's what I'm saying. I'm able to go out and walk miles, and I don't take anything except my watch.
I've had times. I've had times when I walk out and I forgot to take my my phone or my wallet or whatever, and not very often, but I've done it, like going to get coffee or something, and I just pay with my watch, and it does feel very freeing. And the one thing that is that I went to a store that I wanted to use my Apple Watch, and they said, "Oh, we don't use Apple Pay here." I said, "Okay," and I went somewhere else. I've never been back to that store. it's like just completely like not. I'm not like a store that don't accept Apple Pay at this point. I've become pretty ruthless about. I won't go to them. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it's going to be dangerous because they're going to tie that Apple Pay later into your health monitoring. It's going to say, "I see you've fallen and you're 2 payments behind on your Apple Pay."
Yeah, exactly.
We will not call the ambulance until you agree to pay us.
If it has all the health information about you for for a trajectory, it says, "I don't think we can get you in a payment plan because we're pretty sure you're not going to survive the payments." We're going to cut you off because we can see the trajectory of your health. And we've seen this over many periods of time, and I'm just afraid you're not trustworthy anymore.
Bill, you're at an ice cream store. 1 scoop only, please.
Yeah,
I can see that on my wrist.
Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. What market do you see for watch dedicated apps?
That has not been a very successful market. A lot of people have tried to build apps that are doing that, and the one that I feel like people haven't done yet, and I have a thing. I have instead of having a gym and everything else, I have this thing called a Revolution, which is a Bowflex thing that has these springy weights on the sides and stuff like that. And I've been designing, in my copious free time, this little thing that will grab onto those bars that the springy weights are that will control them. And the problem really has been a lever system that is not. I want to be able to automatically change what the resistance is, and the reason I want to do that is because I think that the watch could be part of, if you tie it into the exercise equipment, and I think Apple may go down this path at some point. I wanted to just completely manage my workout. Now they do that to some degree right now, where they give you different workouts. But I wanted to say, number one is manage, manage muscle confusion. So that means it's changing your workout all the time, and it knows what it's doing when it comes to that. It tells you, you're gonna, here's 165 pounds. Your target is 10, reps, and you do those 10 reps, and then it keeps track of that for you. You don't have to call it out or write it down or do whatever else you have to do right now. And so then it automatically adjusts what your new goal is going to be the next time. And it keeps track of all of those things. And along with all the biometrics, it could really make a huge difference in how you work out. Because a lot of times the number one thing that slows people down who are working out is the not changing it up. You have to change it up all the time, and then you have to increment it properly, and then you have to have enough rest, and it could know all those things for you, all the way down to I bought this new thing, the potential. This is called the what is it called? The Hydrate Spark. It keeps track of how much water I drink. It literally, I have an iPad app. Every time I set it down, you see this little thing glow and it's weighing it to figure out to figure out how many ounces of water I drank. And I have literally tripled my intake of water since I got it, because it's tracking it. You don't track what matters. What you track matters. Go ahead, Courtney.
And my bladder keeps track of how much water I drink.
There you
Great
go.
indicator.
Exactly.
No, I would look for an app, and I'd love to see it. Of course, it doesn't have the hardware to do this yet. Well, it might be able to with an outboard device. Is an infrared emitter. So how many times it's the opposite of the health tracking apps. You're sitting in your easy chair, you're watching TV, the phone rings, and you're trying to find the mute button for the remote. You can't find the remote. Just to be able to tap your watch and mute everything that's playing in the room would be great. Maybe it could link over Bluetooth to a infrared emitter somewhere. That would be a great app to have, but I haven't ever seen that. There was somebody that made a watch that was used, a Chinese watch that had an infrared emitter on it, and it was for use in bars. You could go into a bar or a Best Buy where they have tons of television sets, and you just hit a little clandestine button on your watch, and it would transmit the off code for about every single infrared TV out there. It would just shut all the TVs off everywhere.
There was somebody that did that it was like CES. Someone went to CES and turned off like half of one of the halls, like half of the South Hall. They were wandering around. I think they started changing stuff in the TVs because they didn't notice it when they were doing it at an airport, but they definitely noticed it when you did it at CES. Go ahead, John.
So I don't think this is political, but 1972, high fructose corn syrup was introduced into our population. And right now,
Is that when it did it?
72, it was Nixon.
Right.
It's a great story, by the way. 10% of the population of the United States have diabetes right now. Almost 100 million have pre-diabetes. Having glucose monitoring on your watch to show you how much sugar you're eating is a huge, huge marketplace.
I agree. I mean, we talk about a lot of things that are dangerous in this world, and we're trying to legislate them all right now. And my understanding is about 3.6 million people die a year just to corn syrup. Like that is literally kills over 3.5 million people a year. And, and it's, I always compare it to everything else that people talk about. Like, this is dangerous. I'm like dangerous, like corn syrup, or just kind of dangerous, and as someone who has gotten rid of almost all the corn syrup in my life, I'm pretty, it's been, I haven't lost a lot of weight yet, but I have stabilized it, it just really realized it. So I do agree with you that glucose is a big deal. And, that kind of thing. So yeah, so I definitely think it's important. And I do think that all of these apps, whether it's, this isn't so much a WWDC thing or an Apple thing, but just all of this stuff has allowed us to eat more healthy. If we take advantage of what's available on the web, and what's available now on my phone, of learning how to build that, I can cook things that are very extravagant very easily that I could have never done. Even watching Julia Child's, it's different than what it's the fact that you can get step by step and make it all work is quite a thing. All right. We are done with our WWDC coverage. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about WWDC. We'll also talk about NAMM and Cinegear tomorrow. I know it says WWDC, but we'll just talk about kind of where we've been so far in what we're doing. And so this has been a bit busy week. Infocom, WWDC, NAMM. Saturday we'll have Cinegear, so it's a busy week, and we'll be able to kind of pull all that together. Thank you to our producers for all the great questions and comments, and thank you to our panelists. We can't do this without you. And we also can't do it without all the fine people in the back end that make this work every single day, 7 days a week. Really, really appreciate your work. And now we're going to jump into After Hours.
Quick, roll the credits.